I know a lot of us have been having conversations with family members or friends around politics, around voting this coming election. And I think it's always been a perennial topic in general about how do we talk to our family members or loved ones who maybe have grown up used to us believing a certain kind of thing around religion, around politics, and now we've shifted and now we kind of have to explain our journey to other people or bring other people along in our journey. Politics are probably top to mind, but I think in general, oftentimes there are conversations around how can you affirm LGBTQ people as a Christian? Like, what I hear you have a queer, staff member who's preaching. What's the deal with that? So yeah, and personally for me, it's relevant because my parents are more conservative, religiously and politically. So I have a lot of conversations, and I think Jonathan led a workshop earlier this fall. I want to say on.
It was actually not this fall. It was like in June, May or June.
Oh, really? Maybe it just feels very recent. Yes. I feel like I'm already in spring. I'm talking about fall. And it was really well attended, a lot of good stuff there. And we wanted to kind of bring back some of that content on just really practical things on how to talk to people with religious and political difference who you love. So, Jonathan, do you want to give us your framework?
Sure. I mean, it started off with a message that I did a couple weeks ago for those who were able to listen or watch. It was the message on peacekeeping versus peacemaking. And so I made this distinction that a lot of times when we get together with family, especially over the holidays, we want to be peacekeepers. And so I say, like, peacekeepers, ultimately at the end of the day, they want to minimize conflict. But in minimized conflict, they're actually not solving any issues whatsoever. In minimizing conflict, we let the status quo remain the status quo. And so my point was that as peacekeepers, by minimizing conflict and maintaining the status quo, it's usually because peacekeepers benefit from the status quo. So, for instance, in the NFL, we have football players who kneel, and you hear a lot of peacekeepers saying, why are they causing trouble? Why are they bringing light to this? They're doing it the wrong way, right? And very rarely do we hear persons of color saying that. It's usually people who benefit from the status quo, who like keeping status quo the same while minimizing conflict. And so what I said in the message a couple of weeks ago is I said, we're not peacekeepers, we are peacemakers. And peacemakers acknowledge that there is conflict and are willing to bring the conflict up to the surface so that at the end of the day, eventually it does resolve all conflict, right? It's a long play. It's a much longer play. And so a lot of people came to us after this and said to us, I'm getting ready to have dinner with my family for Thanksgiving, or I'm going to, go home for the holidays safely. I'm going to quarantine, but it also means I'm going to be there for a longer time. So how do I become a peacemaker with my family? And so, so we started talking about what it meant to be peacemakers with our family. Sarah, for someone who has a family with differing beliefs or differing opinions than you, what does it look like for you to be a peacemaker in your family discussions? What do you end up doing?
Maybe I'll share my reaction towards a very particular end, but just in brief, I think for me, fundamentally it kind of boils down to realizing, I think a difference if the topic you're talking about is like directly relevant to you, if that makes sense. Like if you're a queer person talking about LGBTQ issues with your parents, it's one thing if it's directly implicates you versus if I'm talking about, I'm talking to my parents about anti-Blackness within the Asian community. Technically, it doesn't directly apply to me, it applies to my friends, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I feel like depending on where you enter the conversation feels a bit different. And I think I would have slightly different recommendations if you are the personal person kind of being implicated. But for the sake of just like, this hypothetical, let's assume you're talking about, for the most part, a topic that is not directly relevant to you, which I think most of our congregation is in. How do you talk about? And I think the fundamental thing I always try to think about is, am I in this to score points or to kind of exercise guilt or be like, I am self-righteously better than you? Or am I like genuinely trying to, get people to understand? Because you can kind of tell in the tone and the way someone talks to you. Like, are they genuinely trying to have a conversation, or they're just like, you're such an idiot, blah, 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 even if you're not saying that. So when I listened to your workshop, that was kind of takeaway I had. I was like, oh, I need kind of need to think about my real goals here, and even in having these conversations.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, because I think ultimately many of our conversations, especially the ones we have over social media, which I'm going to stay out of that, are to quote unquote own somebody else, right? Let me come out on top. Let me be, yeah, let me win this argument or whatever it may be. Whereas I think peacemakers, and I think our church being a peacemaking church, we see things happening in the world right now that at least I feel are antithetical to Jesus, or antithetical to the way of Jesus. And so it's like, okay, well, if I really believe that and I really want to see God's kingdom come to this place, then this conversation is worth having. And so, yeah, I mean, if our goals, like, I think that's a really good place to start, like goals wise, like what are our goals around this? And I think the thing that we should know first and foremost when we talk about goals is we're not going to solve this in one sitting, right? We're not solving these conversations in one sitting. We're not going to change somebody's mind in one sitting. And so I always say, like, once we establish goals, like, what do we want out of this? And the second thing we do is like establish boundaries. What kind of boundaries do we create? I came across this quote, and I cannot get to the bottom of who said it first. I think it's someone named Prentice Hemphill, but they say boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And I like that. Like, so if we're trying to make peace, we're trying to do it in a way that's loving, that brings God's kingdom, and we're doing it with people that we ultimately love, knowing that we're not going to solve this right away. What boundaries can we make that we continue to love ourselves, that we're not putting ourselves through the ringer, and still love the people that we're talking to? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to enter a conversation kind of knowing what your limits are. Like, at what point am I going to disengage? At what point am I going to be like, all right, this is enough, what have you. Um, you know, just to go back real quickly on topic of goals, and I'm just thinking about this when I came up to my parents like a month before Trump was elected. And so when we had a lot of political conversations around our differences, and my parents voted for Trump, um, I realized we were having kind of proxy conversations, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So we were talking about immigration, or we were talking about white supremacy, but really we were talking about like the fact that I, came out, if that makes sense, and the
Mhm.
fact that that launched us in separate teams. And I think going back to goals, I think recognizing, and then we'll move on to the next few steps, like can what you fundamentally need from this conversation actually be met in this conversation? Like, if fundamentally I'm trying to convince my parents to believe in this immigration policy, or believe that Stephen Miller has done some evil things, because I want them to accept me, and that's like the fundamental desire and the goal I have, like maybe this conversation isn't the right conversation to have to get to
Mhm.
that goal, and that it's a separate thing altogether. So just kind of recognizing that within yourself, and then what kind of is going on internally. Anyway, but yes, boundaries are really helpful. Even a time boundary, physical boundary of leaving the room, all that kind of stuff. What's like the next step after that, Jonathan?
I mean, we talk about, the next step is refusing to be silent, which I think we sort of hit on at the beginning. I mean, we want to create boundaries, we want to create goals up front. And then I think it comes down to that really awkward moment where somebody maybe brings up something at the dinner table, we try to change subjects,
Mhm.
or that person says, well, I'm voting for so and so, or I voted for so and so, I'm glad they won. And I think I'll speak for myself, my first reaction is to stay silent. Like, sometimes I'm like, I don't have the energy for this conversation, which, by the way, is a good boundary. Sometimes we don't have
Yeah.
energy for it, but assuming that we do, it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then we see, historically speaking, that change does come. Change does take effect when people refuse to stay silent. And so sometimes it takes on the form of protest, sometimes it takes on the form of civil disobedience. But simply saying, like, now, why do you think that, or why do you believe that, or you mentioned this, which means in some respect you want to talk about it. Why is that? And that initial question, not the one that goes, oh my God, I can't believe that you did that, or I can't believe you voted for that person, but the one that is inquisitive, I think needs to be the next step. Don't refuse to stay silent. If it's a value, if we believe it's going to make peace, then we should say something about it. And I feel like that's the hardest step to take. I think over and over, again, speaking for me, there are times when I know I should speak up, and I'm like, wow, if I speak up now, uh, then I'm gonna, it's gonna take some physical energy. It's gonna take some emotional energy. Maybe I'll just keep eating and keep my mouth shut. And too often, like I take the easy way out. And so, yeah, so just that simple. Hey, I'm not gonna stay silent about this. I'm gonna ask the question.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of recognize going back. So I keep bringing at goals, but like, is your staying silent, is your speaking out just mostly a way for you to like cleanse yourself of the guilt of complicity, or,
Right.
or is your speaking out actually like trying to like move the needle a little bit with this one family member? And maybe if that's really the goal, which I hope it is, because I don't think going back to like our works do not enable our innocence, that we believe in grace and all that kind of stuff. That maybe the conversation is better had one-on-one, and not in front of like everyone. I know for sure if I were to disagree with my dad in front of a bunch of people, there's just no way I would win. Like,
Hmm.
his goal would just be to destroy any argument because he doesn't want to look bad. So yeah, I think so. It's important to speak up, but once again, just think about the context of setting your goals. And the other part I really like you talk about, Jonathan, is this. And once you kind of speak up in the form of a question, not like a monologue, ideally, I think, is it's to then look for shared values or
Oh,
shared.
absolutely.
You want
Yeah.
to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think too often, especially right now where things are so divisive, it's like, shared values, actually, we have them. They're there, and they're not all that hard to find.
Mhm.
They aren't. So recently, I've had conversations around um, early termination of pregnancy, around abortion. And so people will say to me, just off the bat, people will say, like, well, because you're pro-choice, you don't care about the sanctity of life. And I'll say, no, like, not at all. I care deeply about the sanctity of life. I truly do. And I care about it in many of the same ways that you care about it. But I do have another way of going about it that I think is worth it. So right away, all of a sudden, I don't care about, no, I do care about it. I'm with you on this. I want to see the same things you want to see.
Mhm.
As an affirming church, we get this often, which is, well, you don't take scripture seriously. And we'll say, and I'll often say, I take scripture more seriously than I've ever taken it before. It's because of the robust theological components that I see in scripture that I'm making this. So I'm with you. I agree with you. Scripture is so incredibly important, and we have to start with scripture. So let's start there together. Um, you actually brought up a good example talking about like defunding the police, and somebody says, well, if you defund the police, you don't care about safety. And it's like, actually, no, because I want safety for all people, and because we don't want the police to have to deal with people who are mentally challenged throughout their day, because we want these things. We want to see money allocated in different places that allow the police to do their jobs better. We both want the same thing. We want what's best. And so I think starting from that place of shared values immediately diffuses a conversation, or diffuses an argument, and keeps it as a conversation. And that, to me, I know that in 9 times out of 10, I know that our conversation is going to move forward once we find a shared value.
And it's very disarming, I think, because people come in expecting immediate, like, this is why you're wrong. But to disarm them and be like, actually, I do care about, scripture. I do care about, you know, no one really wants to have an abortion. Like, I think we can all be on the same page about that and
Right.
how to reduce that. Or, I do care about getting to the root causes of safety. And we think police is maybe a band-aid solution. And then is like, how do you take that a step further? And I think Jonathan, just because Jonathan's written about this, I know a little bit about it. Kind of building some kind of shared beliefs or premises together once you have the shared value. So, I had this conversation actually with my parents about immigration. So I started with like, and in particular, we're kind of conversation about immigrants, undocumented immigrants who commit crimes. And so I was like, well, in our scripture and in tradition, we agree that, we value forgiveness over punishment, right? I mean, is that the whole point of our faith? I don't know.
Right, right.
And the parents had to be like, yeah, I was like, and so if that's the case, like, why don't, and we agree that a lot of people are coming here, fleeing like pretty destitute areas of poverty, of violence. Sometimes, coming here is really an act of safety and choice. And we agree, because my parents are immigrants as well, that that was not our experience. So we agree that we cannot really use our experience as much as a judgment, as a barometer on what have you. And then, and I think you could do that kind of like, okay, so we agree on this for a bunch of other issues. I mean, Jonathan, you have a couple on your own, of your examples on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine are all biblical. Especially just because that's where I have most of my conversations are biblical components. And so, once we establish the commonality, right? We have a common belief. We both believe in the inspiration of Scripture. We believe in the beauty of Scripture, that it informs us. And so let's just be honest. And I think we can both be honest and say that, Scripture has been used to justify a lot of bad things. It's been used to kill people. It's been used to exclude. It's been used to endure slavery. It's been used to, silence women. It's been used in a variety of ways, and frankly, it's been used in a variety of ways that we no longer adhere to. And so I'll say, would you agree with me on that? And 9 times out of 10, someone's like, yeah, I actually would agree with you on that. Yeah, I think you're right. It has been, which then allows you to ask, that next question, right? So once we find the commonality, and once we find the common beliefs, right, the shared values, then the question would be, okay, so is it possible then? Is it at all possible, if we've established that we both believe in Scripture, if we establish that we both believe that in the past, Scripture has been used to exclude, to hurt, to kill, to all the rest, to oppress, then is it possible that in a situation like LGBTQI affirmation, that we're doing the same thing right now, and maybe in our culture and context we don't realize it in the same way that they did that? And obviously right here is where the conversation gets difficult, right? We've moved this far to the question, but at least we've been on the same page this far. And now the discussion we're going to have is not going to be this really like contentious discussion, but a discussion based on commonalities, based on premises, where somebody could say, hey, well, I think I think this is an all-time situation where this is exclusion for all time. But it at least gives us the opportunity to say, well, based on the fact that we both agree on this, and based on the fact that we both believe this, I take a different stance here. But what it does is it's not coming from apples and oranges. We're coming from that same baseline. And so when we're able to ask that next question, that lead-in question, that's a question that I think at least gets both sides thinking a little bit more. I know that a friend of mine, he's an author. His name is Brian McLaren. Brian McLaren always says he doesn't necessarily lead with a question. He goes, yeah, this is tough. We believe some of the same things, but yeah, there's a little bit of anxiety because I believe something a little different, and that definitely causes me a little anxiety. I hope you can understand that maybe I feel this way about it. He brings the emotional aspect into it. And says like, just I probably feel like you're feeling some anxiety too, and let's both talk about maybe how we're feeling a little bit of that as well. And that's another commonality, right?
Totally. And I think the bridge from shared premises to question, we recently written kind of like a short blog post, but another example would be if you applied it to like police and criminal justice type stuff. Recently we had news that you could say like recently, in Philadelphia, police responded to a 9/11 call for someone whose son was mentally ill, and the parents were trying to call the ambulance or someone to help protect the son, protect the family, but instead the police shot this. I think his name was Walter Wallace Jr. He's 27 years old, just a few years younger than me. Shot him like 12 times. He was just holding a knife, and you can just ask like, we agree that people with mental illness should not be shot, or should be taken care of. That's how we should respond with compassion and charity, what have you. So do you feel like there might be a better way of responding, of having different first responders for episodes of mental illness than like people who are trained to shoot? They're trained to respond with violence because they're not trained to do other things. And then I think that could bring about a different kinds of conversation. And part of it's also about controlling, I think, the terms of the conversation, because they'll by doing this you're able to like control how the conversation happens, as opposed to like if you did the conversation on their terms. Like my dad was constantly sending us WhatsApp articles through WhatsApp on like homicide rates spiking throughout New York City. So if I started the conversation on his terms, I could probably get there, but I feel like it would be easier if I started a little bit on my terms and then figure out how to bridge there. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. So it's not easy.
It's incredibly tricky. And I think, for that one in particular, I have friends that send me that stuff too. The city's a mess. And
Mhm.
I always start like, hey, we both want like a thriving New York City. A thriving New York City helps
Yeah,
America's economy. So I understand why you think that. And then I always go, but I'm living here right now. And here's what, but yeah, but just even starting from that place of like, yeah, we both want good things for this city. So knowing that, let's not talk about how it's a mess and how it's broken. Let's talk about the good parts and how we can get this, how this city can thrive again. Or, I personally don't think it's not thriving, but it gets the conversation going.
totally. So
Yeah, yeah. I think the last step is just knowing when to walk away, knowing when a conversation might be over, and knowing when, like, hey, we've gotten this far, and we'll pick this up again at some other point. But at least we have each other thinking. And then the very last thing I'll say is I've been trying to be mindful of just not believing that I'm right about everything.
mm,
I've been trying to be mindful of maybe saying, okay, what if my presupposition is not correct? Like, what if I just need to truly listen in a way where I have a bit of a blank slate? Would it change the way I respond and react? And it's a hard practice. And I think, if I'm thinking out loud, it's probably an easier practice for someone like me with privilege who can afford to kind of sit back and take a look. But regardless, um, it's just something I've been practicing lately. Like Donald Trump, who I absolutely abhor. That's no secret. When he talks, trying to go, okay, what's going on behind what he's saying? Is there any truth to any of this? Is there something there that maybe I'm missing? And maybe it's just a little bit more benefit of the doubt than I'm used to giving. And maybe Donald Trump's not the best example either, because usually when I do that, I'm like, no, I'm not missing anything. but but yeah, but to that point.
but I think there are even disputes within the left, for instance. And this is me kind of maybe getting into the weeds around like criminal justice. There are different approaches to reform, and how do we take into account the fact that some of the pushback against like defunding police come from people in areas where there is a lot of crime, and they can't really wait for the long-term solutions of poverty reduction. They need
Mm.
like immediate relief and stuff like that. And there is some conversation even within the left around you know to what extent do we need to take some of these statistics seriously and how to respond to that. Um, and even with LGBTQ stuff in scriptures, it seems like a very binary thing. Like you either affirm or don't affirm. It's not really a ton of in between. I think one way to think about how to listen to the other side is to listen to the anxiety. Going back to what your pastor friend, forgot his name already, said. Because I think oftentimes when you listen to the anxiety, it's not the anxiety of like, oh, I'm afraid of finally accepting someone or something like that. It's like, I'm afraid if I accept you, I will lose everything. I will
Mhm.
lose the entire structure of my faith that has guided and given meaning to my life for the past 60 years. So that is like that is something to be afraid of if you feel like you're going to lose all of that. And so how do you kind of gently massage and walk people through that? Requires a lot of capacity, particularly if you're yourself a queer. I'm talking about that, and I think, yeah, just make sure I think you have the wherewithal, the resources, the support system around you to start engaging those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And maybe this is where we end. We know that in the next, few weeks, the next 8 weeks, really, it's going to be a difficult time for everyone. Um, whether it be through election, through seeing family, through some of that tension, through trying to figure out the safest way to be with family. And so for Forefront at our church, know that we're here, know that we're praying, know that we have a care team, know that we have people who are willing to continue to pastor and continue to hear and to help in whatever way we can when it comes to talking to our family members or navigating what's going on, and just being reminded that at the end of the day, like, God still reigns. Jesus still reigns. Like that's still real. That's still a thing.
Yeah. Patrick had a great comment there to point, we both want good things are so crucial. I've had many conversations with more conservative friends and family who think I want to destroy America. Crossing the line of I want good things for you and me, I want seems to be the first step establishing that trust. I mean, it's almost like you don't think, you almost presume it, and you don't think, oh, maybe I don't need to say it. But I think just vocalizing that can really go a long way. Maybe the very last comment I'll say is that as important as it is, I think, to talk to family and friends and kind of like almost like a matter of integrity, almost, if you're gonna say all these things in your social life or professional life, like your family life should be a bit consistent. Sometimes I do think, all the hours people spend in talking to family members, and I totally understand the stakes. What if we just took some of those hours and just like applied it to like phone banking, or applied it to like calling people to organize people against voter suppression. Like sometimes I think it's a lot of energy for like 5 people, or you could call like 50 voters. So just kind of weigh it in your calculus as to what you have capacity for and what you're willing to do.
No, that's good. That's a good word. And I think in our blog post we say as much. We say at some point the conversation has to turn to action. Yeah. At some point we can, and I get it. We want to talk to our family members. We want it to be a comfortable holiday experience. But at some point it's like, go out and vote, go out and bless the ballot, go out and organize around a policy, go do those things, because that's also going to make the change that we want to see.
Cool. So we're going to take a break next Thursday. We're going to do it to every other week. We'll announce it on Sunday, I think. And then the following Thursday, we'll regroup and we'll have a new topic.
And it'll be exciting. What a topic it'll be.
Sounds good. It'll be post-election theology Thursday. So we'll probably talk about that.
We might have to just pray through the whole thing. That's it.
Yep, seriously. For votes to be counted, which they'll still be counted then.
Right. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.
We'll see y'all. Bye.